Chapter 4. You run that check, Ellis. Ellis looked up at the cam bolted over his console and nodded, trying to look efficient. Lara had all the monitors on, SOP on countdown. Yes, sir. All systems operative. IVs primed and ready. Good. Remember, son, if Max don't fire, we're all down the pan. Get him mobile. Pop sounded uncharacteristically friendly in a bluff and over-hearty manner. Ellis was surprised for a few seconds until he got it, all part of the show for Sturgis. A fine and encouraging leader, Pop Izzard, as long as the company was present. He took a deep breath and stood up, trying to forget that he was being watched. It wasn't easy. As he stepped into the cold white room where Max lay sleeping, he could hear Pop and Sturgis over the open comm. Is that the robot? Berserker, said Pop. Mobile Assault Exo Warrior. More commonly known as a Max. Human intelligence locked into almost 10 metric tons of heavily armed and armoured exoskeleton. There was a silence as Sturgis probably digested what Pop had said. Sometimes it took a minute for those that weren't up on anti-XT technology. Ellis walked to the table and hit the hydraulics, the massive pistons hissing and thrumming to life. The slab slowly raised the Max into an incline, reinforced beams sliding into place to support the massive upper body. The Berserker's giant legs were locked, its feet resting against welded block steel to prevent slippage. Heavy treads lowered from beneath the table and thunked to the floor. For just a second, Ellis could see Max as he'd first seen it, back in the program. When the tech had set it up, Ellis had been struck by how much it looked like a child's toy, a child's imagination of the ultimate He-Man monster. Massive arms, the left tipped with a revolving liquid propulsion grenade launcher and pulse rifle, the right a tri-capacity M210 flamethrower. Its necklace head was almost insectile, twin full-scan sensors set into the deeply hollowed eye sockets like a wasp's nest. 3 meters high and nearly a meter across at its widest, its planted upper torso was swollen with banks of synth and medical equipment, giving it the appearance of huge pectorals. The primary colour was a dull burnt orange, pocked with the slight hue changes of a million surface repair jobs. It had looked like one of those toys he'd had as a kid that could turn from a robot into a dump truck and then back again. Except Max only sleeps or kills. Sturgis's voice was a stage whisper over the comm. There's a man in there. Used to be. Don't know what you'd call him now. Pop sounded amused. Only complete antisocials volunteer for Max. Ellis mused that over as he lifted the cabled control box that would lead Max's bed to the APC. He'd given a lot of thought to who the Max really was in his first few weeks. Who this Max was. Company techs assembled and sealed the Berserkers at private corporate labs, carefully guarding their trade secrets. Even Ellis had been trained only to run Max, not to jeopardize the integrity of the suit unless in an extreme emergency. He'd never known the person that lived inside, seated in the lower belly like a fetus. The training program had barely touched on the volunteers, stating only that they were predatory criminals convicted on multiple violent offences, life plus. Doing a Max meant they'd get a chance to transfer to a lighter security institution, better facilities, something like that. Provided that a panel of psychiatrists agreed that they had rehabilitated themselves somewhere along the way. Ellis wondered how the felons managed to accomplish this. There was no contact between the human volunteer and the outside world, his or her only expressions through computer reads and sensor pickup and body chemistry. He flipped a row of switches and followed along as the Max moved heavily out of the lab and into the hall. It was a he. Ellis knew that from the medical records. They also told him that the volunteer was in his mid-30s, weighed barely 48 kilos, had blood type A positive. A long list of chemical and bio and robotic reads that told him nothing about who it was, who he was. The closest thing to personal history, at least that Ellis had access to, was that he had performed in 9 missions and was slated for 3 more before an overhaul. He stopped Max in front of the lock to the boarding area, where the APC and the ground team waited. He heard Pop's voice echoing through the large chamber, explaining the Berserker to Sturgis as they surely watched he and Max over the monitors. It carries its own IV banks, and we use sedatives to maintain him in a dreamless coma state until required, then bring him up to fighting speed with doses of synthetic adrenaline. When that kicks in, anything between him and the target will be annihilated. Ellis could hear the pride in the commander's voice as he opened the first door to the lock and manoeuvred Max into the inactive pressure chamber, pressing the directional pad. Pop acted like he personally was responsible for Max's behaviour. That doesn't seem to keep a man in that condition. Sturgis sounded sickened. They're volunteers, remember? And a necessary precaution, believe me. The man in there is interfaced with the Max to kill. If you've seen a Berserker go critical, you don't want that to happen when you're around. Lara's voice broke in. Switching to remote monitors. They'd be getting pictures from the team now, focused on their tasks as they readied the APC and themselves for combat. Ellis took a deep breath as the second lock clicked open. His first mission, his work, that these men would depend on. "Yo, Ellis!" Martin Jess started over to him, smile white against his dark brown skin. Jess would load the Max into the armoured vehicle and take him into Deep 4, while Ellis ran the IVs from Nemesis. Jess called out to the other two, still smiling. "Looks like we got a complete team, boys. No getting out of it now." Pulaski swaggered over and nodded at Ellis, his massive build dwarfed by the Max's. He reached into a pocket and pulled out a half-eaten candy bar, offering it to Ellis. Ellis smiled and shook his head. "Thanks, but I wouldn't want to get too psyched and push the wrong button." Pulaski guffawed and slapped a meaty hand across Ellis's thin shoulders. "Yeah, I hear that. Good that you're thinking, right? Kick some ass there, new boy." He laughed again as Teep joined them, looping a cable into neat coils over one arm. "So it's ready?" Teep was pale, but seemed calm, together. 100%, said Ellis. He met Teep's dark gaze with his own, expression serious and, he hoped, confident. "He's ready, and so am I." Teep nodded, then smiled lopsidedly. "I guess if you're not, I'll have to come back and haunt you or something." Ellis smiled back hesitantly, surprised that Teep could joke about it. There was silence for a few seconds, and Ellis could suddenly feel the high tension that suffused the huge room. Jess apparently felt it too. "All right, get back to it, Grunts." "Grunt this," smirked Pulaski, grabbing at his crotch. Teep laughed, a high and reedy sound, but both men turned back to their work, the APC already poised atop the wide ramp. Jess took the cabled box from Ellis gently. "I got it from here, Ellis. You just stay cool, all right?" Ellis nodded. As he turned to leave the bay, his heart thumped gladly in shared excitement and a feeling that he belonged here. The men had included him as one of their own, accepted him as a vital member of their team. He didn't know what their crimes had been, but he'd gotten used to their big talk and stupid jokes, and he believed that they were brave and decent men beneath their rough exteriors, not the low-life felons he'd expected. Ellis stepped into the lock and exhaled sharply, ready to do his job. It felt good to be part of something. He wouldn't let them down. Lara lowered the main cargo bay ramp and watched on remote as the APC lurched clunkily into action, then smoothed out and left the Nemesis behind in a churn of dust. The flat planes of Treon spun into view. The transport headed for the infested mine's covered entrance several hundred meters away. They were in ops, Pop sitting behind her at his own console. Sturgis was just outside the door, talking softly into a Deep 4 remote. Although she couldn't hear the words, the sounds were hurried and anxious. He'd be sending the remaining techs to safe areas, trying to secure his crumbling operation. Lara felt sorry for him, but had learned to keep a distance from the targeted colonies she'd been to. This job took enough of a toll as it was. "ETA, 1 minute 30, said Lara. "You ready down there, Ellis?" Pop's voice seemed overly loud in the small space. "Yes, sir." He sounded nervous. Lara looked at the lab monitor and saw only a still face. Ellis's attention concentrated on his reads and stats. Good. As long as he stayed focused, there'd be no problem. She'd run Max on the Nemesis's previous missions, and 3 of her first 5 runs with the strike's team. It wasn't hard, but there were a lot of details to see to. The company had decided to add synthetics tech specialists to their Berserker teams a few months back, and Ellis was their first assigned. The stated reason for the addition was to keep Max in prime operating condition at all times, but Lara wasn't so sure. A rumour had been circulating throughout the stations that a Berserker had wiped out a crew somewhere due to mismanagement. By the slight movement of his cam, Pulaski was chewing on another candy bar and watching his teep put on his additionals. All of the men wore acid-resistant plate over high-degree reflection undershirts and leggings, but Teep also had a full mask and hood, now pulled around his neck. He'd pull it up when they hit contact. Teep's helmet was beside him on the bench, the screen showing a fixed shot of the weapons rack and part of Pulaski's beefy arm. Jess's voice came in clear and smooth as his remote showed the shaft entrance just ahead. The APC's cam gave a wider angle picture. It looked like a giant steel plate laid into Trayon's surface, dotted with long, low storage units and flexed piping. Deserted and cold in the meagre afternoon light. "Getting pictures back there, Nemesis? Over?" "Affirmative, Jess. The equipment ramps at..." She translated the reads in front of her quickly. 10 o'clock. "Oh, and check your screen for layout. Looks like no door-to-door cover." "Copy that. Over." Lara smiled. Jess had been a Marine for years before, but had been discharged for general inability to follow procedure. That, and beating up an officer. "Something funny?" Pop laid one warm hand on her shoulder, his voice soft and friendly. Sturgis was still outside the small room. Lara felt a momentary confusion. She'd made it clear, only a few days ago, that she wasn't interested in continuing their affair, for lack of a better word. A few nights in his cabin, a few in hers. Technically very satisfying, but ultimately not a relationship she wanted to keep. Eric was a lot less satisfying when it came to things like communication, but she thought he had accepted it well. "Oh, no," something Jess said. Lara wondered if she should tell him to remove his hand, then decided against it. She didn't want to blow things out of proportion or get into a debate, not with a mission running. Sturgis finally finished his call and walked back into the room, solving the problem for her, for now at least. Pop went back to his station and picked up his headset. Lara adjusted her own and checked stats from the ground team. Teep's heart rate was already up, as was Pulaski's. Jess was usually the coolest of the 3, still in the 80s as he stopped the APC on top of Shaft 1's heavy equipment ramp. The ramp bottomed right at the massive blast barrier. Not enough room to turn the APC around without opening the door first. They'd have to take Max in from where they were. Pop walked back over to watch her at her console. The monitors were bigger. Sturgis joined him. The ground team was in fine form, Jess quickly unloading Max and Teep leading the small but sturdy cart that carried the failsafe. They moved down the ramp, Pulaski jogging ahead to find the manual barrier lock. "Got us a bug hunt," he said under his breath, then cackled to himself, seeming to forget that his helmet picked up everything. The Candyman was not the brightest of volunteers Lara had run across. He found the lock, a heavy wheel set into plasticrete to one side of the plated doors. Jess and Teep moved towards the door, rifles drawn. At a signal from Jess, Pulaski turned the manual. The thick metal shield split into 2 interlocking panels and slid apart, opening into darkness. Leaving Max and the nuclear device behind for the moment, the team slipped inside, one at a time.